Firstly, it's an honor to be here. Thank you, everybody, for making it to the fair. The largest ever fair conference. For background, the largest ever fair conference before this was 400 people 3 years back. This is before, actually 5 years back, before COVID. So we've surpassed the highest number by 50%. That is something that we should all be very, very proud of. Today, of course, I will be talking to you about, the intersection of what we see from our vantage point at SAFE for FAIR and FAIR Institute. But before I jump into the specifics and my learning that I'd like to share today with you, I'd like to get your juices flowing in your brain to think about what's common between these three phenomenal companies, Databricks, Confluent, and ServiceNow. The simple answer to that, they were all built on open standards. Today, they are gigantic companies, not just from a perspective of revenue and market cap, but the impact that they've delivered for the last few decades. Databricks started with the Apache Spark project. Kafka, which was an open standard, is the reason why Confluent exists. ServiceNow started with ITIL. Now, if you think about all of them, they proved that this particular open standard is not just theory. There are, and I asked this to ChatGPT, and it did 36 seconds of thinking to come up with this. There are more than 40 million open standards and open source projects out there. How many of them see the day of the light to actually make an impact, to actually go ahead and get scaled, operationalized in companies or individuals' lives? Less than 0.001%. And how do you make that happen? That is what these phenomenal platforms did for these open standards, for these technologies. And that is exactly what we're trying to do with FAIR. FAIR is a phenomenal, framework which can do a lot. But again, a framework by itself means nothing if you don't turbocharge that with something that can actually be applied in day-to-day decision-making, day-to-day solutions to issues which are out there. How do we know it's working? Just to give you some context. Today, with SAFE, we're protecting and collecting billions of signals in assessing over 160 million assets every single day, looking at risk across 12 million employees across every place where we have deployed, looking at risks across different dimensions for analyzing over 1.3 million third parties, and so much more. And this is automated. Last year, when I took the stage to give you the keynote at the FAIR conference, we spoke about what is needed from a degree of automation. And today, all of these numbers are not static one-time analysis that has happened with FAIR. This is continuous. This is real time. And that is the future of where we are going towards. And of course, we've executed very, very well. And that is the reason why it shows very, very clearly that the Forrester Wave on cyber risk quantification, second year in a row, placed us on the extreme top right. That comes with the track record of delivering at scale, FAIR and beyond risk analysis or risk management capabilities to the largest companies on the planet. Today, these companies, each one of them are using FAIR, are using SAFE, and have deployed at scale, the largest companies on the planet today. And this is a proof to saying that this is not just theory. It's not difficult to go ahead and actually execute things with. This is real. And this is starting from all the way to the top to the boardroom to all the way to the bottom where a ton of analysts, whether it's vulnerabilities analyst or we're talking about SecOps analyst, et cetera, all of them are actually utilizing what is being delivered with the superpower of FAIR. So my keynote today is going to focus on three key learnings based on everything that we've done deploying FAIR and SAFE to now over a few thousand organizations across the globe. What has been the three key insights that we've seen which differentiates a successful versus non-successful risk management strategy? I'm going to go to that extent. And those three learnings start with some fundamental views. The first question, this was a survey I did, spoke to over 100 CISOs, and I said, how many of you guys do you need cyber risk quantification, CRQ? Do you know what was the answer? Less than 7%. Majority of the CISOs, the moment you talk about CRQ, the moment you talk about, hey, I'm going to help you get you a dashboard because that's how they're thinking. Oh, I'll get another score. I don't need another score. I have a lot of scores. I don't need another dashboard. I have a lot of dashboards which are out there. But then I changed the question. I said, okay, think about it. If a new hack happens, how many of you would like to know how can that hack happen to you? How exposed are you to that hack? 93% said we would love to understand that. I went further. You have a lot of tools in your environment. Suppose CrowdStrike, Wiz, Qualys, any of the tools detect something crazy in your environment. How many of you guys would like to know that what is the impact that finding that 1, 200,000 findings have to your risk posture? More than 95% of them said yes. A lot of security controls that all of us invest in. How many of you guys would like to know that which security controls are the most effective, which are actually working, and which ones would be the ones which you remove, and nothing will change? 94% said yes. I wrapped up my survey with the final 2 questions saying, you're spending a lot of money, right? That's everybody goes ahead and has a different answer to that. But the reality is $200 billion being spent on cybersecurity every year. Would you like to understand, and not just yourself understand, but also show your CFO what is the risk burn down that happened last year based on everything that you spent on your security budget? Hell yes, absolutely. It'll probably get me more budget. It'll enable me to justify why we are doing what we are doing. Last question. You have so many technical tools, and they're phenomenal tools, I'm sure. That's why you have them. You think that's the best in the stack and that you can get from your resources. But each tool is like different moving parts of your body. Would you want to see a central place, a single pane of glass, the state of the union? What is your security risk posture? Of course, hell yes. It's almost like a no-brainer that everybody said. And if you think about it, what I just did with all of those questions, nobody needed CRQ. But the moment you talk about the outcome, there's pretty much everybody and anybody who says, hey, I definitely need that. It's almost like with CRQ, we've been selling the engine of the car. But car companies don't sell, oh, this is the best engine that we have. It probably can attract a few, car junkies. But what is the final value? You can go from 0 to 100 in less than 3.1 seconds. That's the final value that we talk about from a delivery. And that is exactly what we saw out of these thousands of installations across the world. That we've been focused relentlessly on value-based product delivery. Something going from CRQ to what we call as decision intelligence, which is not just a score. It's very funny. The big insight of mine for CRQ is the real value of most scores also is not in the absolute number, but the relativity of the number. And how do you compare, how do you benchmark is what real value lies in between that. Let me show you, let me bring that to life. Remember, we spoke about platforms bringing the open standards to life. Let me actually show you what that looks like, right? So I'm going to go, for example, we say something changed in my environment, right? Again, a simple example would be what you can see on the screen right now. This talks about my likelihood of a breach. Now, it is very evident that there's a sudden spike that I can see in the likelihood of breach here. I'm going to click there and see what it happened. So here, it tells me a red dot, which means there's a sudden spike. I'm going to click on this red dot, so it zooms in, and it tells me that, it went from 26% to 63% likelihood. Now, why did that happen? Of course, there's an AI summary, but I can actually see it looks like the high impact findings, which came from Wiz. There were 2 very critical high impact findings that suddenly came from Wiz, which impacted the likelihood because of which it shot up from 26 to 63. But by the way, that was not the only reason. The moment you click on threat events, for example, I actually got 5 new threat events, which was logged for my industry to be able to go ahead and actually see the spike of the likelihood side of things which is out there. The same can happen for loss magnitude and ALE, which is out there. Again, I'm trying to give you snippets or, views around this is what the value is. The value is not so much in whether it's 63 or 62 or 65. The value is there was a sudden spike because something changed either in my environment or something changed in the environment of the outside. Now, what does that also mean? In order to go ahead and understand what my top controls are, for example. So if I go ahead and actually talk about, say, the risk metrics or the control prioritization. So if I click here, you're actually able to see which are my best performing controls out of all the telemetry that's coming in and what are my worst performing controls in a very, very, very simple screenshot. Imagine using this to be able to go ahead and actually taking decisions of where to double down on your security investments on in providing things together. Obviously, based on that, you can also see where you stand in the industry. So are you best in class? Which percentile of the industry you're at? You're able to go ahead and see that, not just from a scenario by scenario, where what is your likelihood versus what's the industry median and where do you stand in the industry, but being able to see that at a control by control level to see, oh, it looks like my asset management is best in class while the others needs a lot of work, etc., etc. Going back, the reason I'm giving you this small examples is just so that you can go ahead and just get a quick glimpse of what the value looks like. And the value by itself is not just the score, but how things change, how things trend. And that is what we've delivered and what we see as the most successful implementation of where things are. So summarizing the first big learning, they say what's in a name, but the reality is cyber risk quantification is the Achilles heels for widespread CRQ adoption. CRQ is the wrong name. Because quantification by itself is actually limiting the incredible value that CRQ actually delivers. Leaders don't really care about CRQ or FAIR. What they care about is outcomes. And the beauty of CRQ and FAIR, it's so close to the outcomes that the business expects. And that is the reason why quantification is a means to an end, not the end by itself. And that is the reason why we think we've actually been selling this now, that we don't say quantification. We like saying, how can we enable you to take decisions? And that's why it's called decision intelligence. That's the first big learning that we saw. It's best to call CRQ not CRQ, but the actual value and how do you enable decisions. Let's jump to second learning of what we've seen. If you look at pretty much every course on FAIR, a lot of books, they generally start with this debate about qualitative versus quantitative, right? Is qualitative worse than quantitative? Is it better at some cases? Is it better at all the cases, etc., etc.? But the reality is that we think our biggest learning on the second point here is this is absolutely the wrong question. There's so many theories around why quantitative is better than qualitative. No, we think that us as a community have been fighting the wrong battle for a long time. Okay, if that is the wrong battle, what is the right battle? What is the right question that we should be focused on? The number one reason why I've seen people not adopt CRQ, number one reason is the juice worth the squeeze? It's very, very difficult. I need full-time PhDs to be able to go ahead and make things happen. I need to go ahead and invest very, very heavily to go ahead and actually building something so that I can get some meaningful output from the overall perspective. And that has been a common ask from everybody. I don't think anybody rational will ever say that quantitative is not better than qualitative. But what is the cost that takes me to go to quantitative? That has been the biggest question that we've been seeing. So let's double click on that. How do you solve that? What goes in the process to make the CRQ juice? It's very simple, actually. It's to make any juice. What's the input? What model do you put that in? And what's the output? Very, very simple. Let's start by double clicking each one of these. I'll start with the easiest one. Of course, the model. What most people don't realize that the FAIR standard with the FAIR Institute, with 18,000 members, with 10,000 plus people trained, with the largest companies on the planet today using this model live for decision making. FAIR is not a better model than what is out there. FAIR is the only model which is an open standard and used at the scale. There are multiple models. There's Bowtie, some people are using Bayesian, etc., but they're very bespoke. There's a bunch of 5-10 nerds, and I'm sure they might have a lot of credibility somewhere, but not in front of the regulators, not in front of the auditors. You want something which is standard. So when it comes to standardization, when it comes to going ahead and actually saying what is the credibility of the model which is used to make the CRQ juice, there is hands down nothing like FAIR anywhere on the planet. So the simple question, is the model effective? Is it defensible? Etc. That's actually pretty straightforward. FAIR is a clear winner. Every single time somebody's double-clicked, triple-clicked on FAIR, they have always come back saying, this makes a lot of sense, and we get it. So, simple. The model becomes green. The model is not the problem. And it's very, very, very sound, very, very robust, very, very solid. It stood the test of time. After a decade of FAIR conference, if we have the largest community sitting here, it shows that there's credibility in the model. So where is the problem? It's probably the inputs or the outputs. Let's talk about the inputs. Let's go next forward. So what happened in the past? The garbage in, garbage out problem. And this is a very, very big problem. Because if I go ahead and look at the old way in which a lot of FAIR analytics happened in the early part of the years, what was happening? You needed manual ways of estimating the actual threat event frequency, the susceptibility, the loss event frequency, the primary loss drivers, the secondary loss drivers, etc. Now, when FAIR started a decade back, it was arguably the most reasonable and the most obvious way of doing things. The world has changed in a decade. So when technology evolved and the availability of APIs and now MCP servers, the availability of data and the speed of data processing, and now you can do in less than 1 second tens of thousands of Monte Carlo simulations, which was never possible 10 years back. When the availability of the chops available to go ahead and do the right analysis came in, the old way of doing FAIR obviously was not right. So what happened in the past? You were actually going ahead and putting a lot of subjective estimates to come out with objective results. And hold on. In my view, that obviously doesn't make sense. It would not resonate with any CISO who's rational. Hold on. You want to get objective, but I'm giving a lot of subjective inputs. To get to objectivity, I would rather have the subjective output. That was the core of the problem. And that's exactly where we changed the game. What did we do? Today, there's a lot of data already available. If you look at your existing cybersecurity telemetry, any cybersecurity product worth their salt will absolutely go ahead and actually have behind the scenes APIs where they expose a lot of that telemetry that you can pull that up from. Obviously, a ton of audits, compliance audits, assessments that you're doing weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly, whatever that is, it's available. How do you go ahead and actually get control maturity? Because there's a lot of companies which are investing a lot of time and effort in calculating the efficacy, the coverage, the actual way in which you look at control maturity, storing it at ServiceNow and so many other GRC tools. There's a lot of data in SecOps, which is already out there for threat events that can actually come in and influence your threat event frequency. There's a ton of threat intelligence which actually comes out where you can go ahead, and most good companies already have very evolved threat intelligence programs to be able to take that and contextualize that for your risk. Unfortunately, each one of these bars are siloed in 99% of the companies. What did we do? What did we learn? Very, very simple. This is exactly where we go ahead and we cut across through all of these verticals and ingested all of this telemetry and brought them together in one place and said, look, what can we do to go ahead and then produce insights, which naturally become very, very credible in putting things together. The result, let me show you. When you talk about automation in terms of ingestions, we went ahead and we built over 200 plus API integrations. So you can see if I go here, there are 200 plus API integrations. We connect with pretty much anything and everything which is out there of where things are and how things are. We are already with 150 of them with general availability, with around 40 to 50 of them with early access. And this whole list of integrations is literally 2 clicks where you take a read-only access in putting things together. There are only 2 types of telemetry. One is your security telemetry, and the second is questionnaires. So we actually have a repository where not only can you click, oh, I just did a NIST assessment, I did a PCI assessment, whatever. You can drag and drop that, and our agentic AI actually reads those and influences the control maturity, which in turn influences the cybersecurity risk scenarios of where and how things are. As if this was not enough, last year we actually introduced Threat Center, because talking about cybersecurity risk based on only your controls, your assessments, is only half the story. The other half of the story, which FAIR beautifully defines, by the way, especially with threat event frequency, you have to keep a tab of what's going on in the wild, on the public. And that's exactly what we did with Threat Center, and looking at what's happening to the public world and the public side of things which are out there. So a lot of stuff, when you talk about ingestion of data and doing that in a very, very, very simple and an automated way. And that is really why the inputs problem actually got solved, where you didn't have to go to every scenario, to every single box of FAIR, and then keep manually entering the min, max, and the most likely number and decide the curvature of the graph. All of that gets decided based on what CrowdStrike is detecting in your environment, based on what Wiz is detecting in your environment, based on what an APT26 is doing for your industry, and that gets auto-populated with where and how things are. So the inputs, thank you. But the inputs which come in here is really, it fundamentally changed the game. And the whole goal was, how do you go ahead and build that in an automated way? But by the way, that is still half the story, because that was automated inputs. What happens with the outputs? Because you can automate a lot of stuff which is ingestion of inputs there, but what happens to the outputs? So we think a big learning and insight for us, whenever we talk about CRQ, the heart and soul of CRQ's output, the heart and soul of CRQ's output is in one word, which is a defensibility. If you're not defensible with what you provide as your analysis, when you go to the board, to your CFO, et cetera, you know the good part of defensibility? It's also sometimes the bad part. You get one shot. When you present your numbers, when you carry that to your CFO, CEO, board, et cetera, and it's really the test of 3 questions is what I keep telling. They'll ask you 3 questions, and as long as you not only sound confident, but you can show with confidence where and how things are, that earns you the credibility to now continue presenting the same thing again and again and again, because now you're over the hump of, do I trust these results or not? And then you can be more focused on actual decision making based on what the outcomes are. So we obviously understood this in the past. So whenever we've built, say from the very beginning, we said, never trust a score you cannot click. We were wrong. We revised this. We actually now say never trust a score you can't triple click, because of a simple reason that the more deeper you go and what you're able to see, that is a very important degree of defensibility of what that comes with. Now keep this in mind, being able to look at the likelihood and look at the susceptibility and loss event frequency, and then being able to double click, which I'll just show you, is a very, very important starting point of defensibility. It is not the superset. There is way more that is required when it comes to defensibility, because one, you can look at the inputs and what the actual composition of everything that's going on into the model. But any platform like SAFE by design, we'll need to take a ton of assumptions based on our learnings, as we say, that's a cooler word to say these days, from all the models from the outside of what we see in the industry to tune our models with where and how things are. So defensibility doesn't always mean that you're always seeing the data and that's the only thing that you can see, and that means it's 100% defensible. It's a very, very important component, but not the superset. This is again for the super pro users or the power users of FAIR, and they would understand that. What does that mean when it comes to defensibility? It's actually pretty simple and straightforward. Let me go back and actually show you. So if I go back and I go to any risk scenario, so as I said, never trust a score you cannot click, or triple click. So when you talk about 28%, you click on 28%, it actually shows you, this is the beauty of the FAIR model where you can see, okay, this 27% is coming from 0.52. So if I click here, it actually shows what controls are affecting it. What is the actual threat actor, which is influencing the actual threat event frequency out here. Similarly, for susceptibility, you can see what controls and the capability, coverage, and reliability, going back Q or plug for FAIRCam, influences my susceptibility, and it keeps going up or coming down depending on how the controls behave. Not just on the likelihood side, on the loss magnitude side, when you click here, okay, it's $677 million of financial fraud. Let me see what that means. So you can keep clicking and double clicking and triple clicking and keep going more detailed till the time you come to the last leaf node of saying why the cost is what it is. So the defensibility all the way down to the leaf node that you would talk about to say, hey, when I'm saying it's $25 million, this is the reason it's $25 million. It's not that there is an average cost of a breach is $20 million and I multiplied that by some number. No, that's funny math. This breaks everything down to the cost drivers, and then they're correlated, interrelated to each other, and building things happen. So that's, again, what is a very core component of defensibility. And big second learning is that how do you put automated inputs, make the model right, which thanks to FAIR, we don't have to spend a lot of cycles on, and then how do you go ahead and get things which are defendable when it comes to output. Now, I've been talking, of course, and I've been talking to you about the fact that this has been deployed in a lot of very large-scale companies. Why don't I invite somebody who has been both a mentor and a peer, and somebody who I've learned a lot from, Swami, the CIO of S&P Global. Swami, we'd love to get you on stage, sir. Thank you, Swami. So Swami is the CIO of S&P Global. You guys are, again, one of the largest credit rating companies in the world. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, Swami, firstly, I'll start with a question of, talk to us a little bit about your scale of S&P Global and what are you seeing? And then we'll come to a few questions around FAIR and the safe implementation.
Yeah, first of all, Saket, I met you maybe in 2022 or so. Yeah. You have brought this company and this institute very, very far. So congratulations for the progress. I'm very happy to be here. You know, most of you are either directly or indirectly customers of S&P Global. When you look at S&P 500 and when you invest something in S&P 500, you're actually using our indices. So one of the largest financial information services company, we have about 42,000 employees. $15 billion of revenue annually, and about we are located in about 48 countries. It's a pretty global company.
Totally.
Anything that you want to know in the financial information services, we have the data, right? Now, with data comes a lot of complexity, and there is no AI without the data. So we're very, very positioned well, and cybersecurity is an important element for us.
Thank you, Swami. Thanks for laying out the lay of the land of what you have to manage as a CIO. Your CISO has been reporting to you. Mm-hmm. To talk to us a little bit about the value that you've been able to see from FAIR, the visibility that you've been able to see FAIR with SAFE that you've experienced in your environment.
First, let me tell you the story of an enterprise CIO, right? The innovation outside is happening very, very fast, and you really cannot keep up with it. I think right now, in the last 25, 30 years, the level of innovation that's happening right now is a lot higher than anything that we have ever seen. What a lot of people don't understand is that innovation solves some problems, but first it brings complexity. And an enterprise CIO has to introduce innovation, but on the back end, keep simplifying the complexity. And that's a lot of work, right? That's number one trend. And number two, what I would say is the lines are blurring between like the operational resilience and cyber resilience, right? So we have that trend. And no matter what anybody says, security is always like an afterthought. And that's why the cyber industry is very, very fragmented. Look at the number of tools that we have. So you're always keeping up, after the fact. So to me, bringing all of this is important because I need to manage the risk, because the risk appetite, as many of you know, is static, right? Every organization has a risk appetite statement saying that I can't afford this, I don't want to do this. But the risk, on the other hand, is dynamic with all the things that I just mentioned. So to me, as a CIO, I'm always worried about what is the weakest link. Can I manage the weakest link and then move the weakest link so that I can mitigate and manage the risk? So safe security and the tool has been pretty good. And I heard you talk about garbage in and garbage out. Information beyond a certain point becomes garbage. So what we're able to achieve is put all the data that we have, because you have to get the static vulnerabilities. You got to get the dynamic vulnerabilities. And then every single component is an asset. Like Amazon S3 bucket is an asset for me. I have to protect it, right? The cloud posture management data, right? All of this data that beyond certain point becomes garbage. I get nice signals out on what I can do, what is the weakest link, and more importantly, how I can prioritize and resolve it.
So, Swami, sounds like a big operationally heavy operation that you're running. And as the boss of everything technology, right? Safe today processes around 2 million assets every day with all the vulnerabilities, with all the issues that come in from across almost like 8 to 10 products of yours, right? How have you operationalized this across your team as a CIO? How do you look at that?
Yeah, so I have a lot of stakeholders that you talked about earlier. Both Nick and Todd talked about. I have the board, I have my executive committee, I have my technology, I have my finance. So I have to manage all of this. So I have a lot of stakeholders to manage. And then I have a lot of people who are responsible for mitigating and managing while keeping the business up and running. So to me, I use the SAFE to talk to a lot of these stakeholders to see where are we moving. And the most important thing to me is how are we prioritizing? Because what happens in large enterprises is that you're always you're scrambling to prioritize your work done, especially when technology every day it is introducing technology debt and cyber is raising the bar. So prioritization is key. So to me, the way I operationalize this, I communicate to the board, I communicate to my stakeholders, I prioritize, but the one that I do is that it's also part of the compensation to my team. How are you managing your vulnerabilities? How are you keeping the risk posture low? What is your velocity is part of the compensation.
And what were you doing before this, Swami? Just so that you get a stark difference of...
It's a lot of narration, right?
Yep.
So right now it's very quantitative. Yeah. Right? And every month I sit with as part of my QBR to talk to the teams about where they are and how are they resolving the vulnerabilities.
Fantastic. I'll ask you the final question, Swami. My team told me that is the picture of yours after getting fair and safe. Is that accurate?
I do not know.
Swami, but this has been amazing. Thank you so much for your time and truly being a champion of the fair.
Great. Congratulations for the progress.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Again, deploying fair and safe at scale. And Swami is a poster child for that. Thank you. So going on to the third learning, which is out there. And that was the second piece. The third big piece, which I keep hearing about when it comes to fair, is really the fact that fair can only be used to do modeling of cybersecurity risks, which are very traditional in nature, like ransomware, like data exfiltration, et cetera, and things around that. The answer? Absolutely a big, bold no. Like gravity. It doesn't matter whether you're on Earth, you go to Mars, you go to the moon. Gravity remains the same. The formula of gravity actually remains the same. That's exactly how fair is. If you think about it, that the first principles on how cybersecurity risk is looked at not just for traditional risk, but even for emerging risks. For example, AI risk analysis. For example, third-party risk analysis. And there's a lot more beyond that. FAIR, the first principles of that, absolutely remain the same. And that is what I want to cover for the next 10 minutes, to give you a perspective of how FAIR has been used to go ahead and look at things which are more holistically and even emerging risk. I'm going to give you an analysis, an example of Cisco AI Defense. I will not use my product this time. I'll actually use Cisco AI Defense, where the big announcement of Cisco that happened almost 6 months back is their big play in the world of AI is they want to do AI security. And for that, they launched a product called Cisco AI Defense. What did they use as a model? To go ahead and do risk modeling within Cisco AI Defense? No surprises. FAIR. These are the screenshots from the actual product of Cisco AI Defense, where they start by looking at the inventory, looking at your models, applications, agents, data, user access, etc., etc. They pull in all of this and then create different risk scenarios, very, very, very specific to AI-specific risk, whether it's LLM prompt injection with data corruption, whether it's ML model evasion, whether it's training data poisoning, etc., etc. And again, the good old way of looking at susceptibility, threat event frequency, and the loss magnitude, and that helps them prioritize where and how things are. This is a double click into one of the actual risk scenarios which is there within the product. Again, something which can totally be done even without the product, because Cisco AI Defense is really good at detecting. It's like Qualys or Tenable, which detects vulnerabilities. Cisco AI Defense detects issues from different components of AI. But putting that together into doing AI risk analysis is what they use FAIR for. Of course, FAIR Air came in, and that is something that was released. Again, you guys can go through the white paper. FAIR Institute has done a phenomenal job in putting that together. And that's, again, around AI risk modeling. But now, let's move on to another dimension of risk. I think the popular number, which became super popular, was 60% of the total third-party, total breaches that happened last year was led by third parties. So if FAIR is very effective in looking at your traditional risks, it needs to be going ahead and playing an important part, especially when the industry is suffering with over 60% of the breaches coming from third party. What has been the traditional approach to third-party risk management? It's actually been pretty straightforward. There have been two categories of vendors. The questionnaire vendors, which are very, very good at what they do when it comes to asking questionnaires or asking compliance reports, etc., pull that in and say, yes, this vendor has a SOC 2 report or whatever that is. And then there have been the cyber rating companies, which actually provide you an outside-in rating, sometimes between A to F, sometimes between 300 to 700 as a score. The problem is, none of them really understood risk. And the fundamental issue, when you look at all of these both worlds, is they're different pieces of the TPRM puzzle, and they were very, very isolated. They were very, very siloed, which never spoke about risk. What did we do? We brought both the worlds together. We don't have a different product for questionnaire. We don't have a different platform for outside-in assessment. We put both of those together. We turbocharged it with more than 40 GenAI agents. And what do you do with that? You throw in all of that data into FAIR. What was the result? We today have analyzed more than around 1.2, 1.3 million third parties using the FAIR analysis, which is out there. In TPRM, FAIR puts the R back. It's very funny, right? Third-party risk management. Nobody was talking risk till FAIR came up, stood, and went ahead and brought the R back to the TPRM. Let's see that in action. So I'll take 2 minutes in just giving you a very quick sneak peek of what that looks like. So if I go in and actually go to a third party, and again, super clean, super easy. If I look at a particular third party, starting from how do you add a third party, doing the outside assessments with digital footprints of a particular third party, looking at the outside-in assessment, this is what the ratings companies do, etc., looking at the fourth parties, looking at the different evidences, whether it's a SOC 2 summary, whether it's a public data of, how many times the third party has been breached, what are the leaked passwords of the third party, SEC filings, recent news, till all the way going and actually doing a contract analysis of the third party, putting all of this data together all of this data together to then come up with the risk summary. And why is this risk? Because when I click on the score, we keep it simple to a score, but that comprises of likelihood from different scenarios. And when you click on any particular scenario, this is the good old FAIR, where you can click on 9%. Remember, never trust a score. You can't triple click all the way down to looking at where things are in terms of the defensibility around that. Now, a lot of people ask me this question that, okay, the analysis by itself is easy. Remember the inputs and the outputs? So if I were to just simply go ahead and give an example of what we've been able to go ahead and actually make all of this so simple with in putting things together, I will go ahead and actually talk about creating a dashboard, create a dashboard, DASH, with for third parties breached in the last 12 months. So again, for the first time ever, what we're able to go ahead and actually do is bring in a true agentic AI experience. By the way, this is true because all of us here, if we are practitioners of CRQ, our life goes in going ahead and building reports. Imagine being able to go and just talk, create me a dashboard for this, create me a report for this. So it does that. It is doing the thinking. I asked, show me the third parties breach in the last 12 months. When you talk about, remember I said 40 GenAI agents? I just, had 3 GenAI agents look at my English, and it has started creating dashboards for me in real time. I can go and say, set me up with a notification on my Slack, on my Teams, whatever that is, and go ahead and show me every time there is a new CVE detected in a third party. And by the way, the same thing can happen for first party also, for your own risk analysis. Again, the future of building a platform with agentic AI, with everything that we are able to go ahead and drive and build towards that. And again, if you are, and this is still thinking, right? I'm sure you guys are familiar with this part with ChatGPT, et cetera, still thinking and building things together and adding more and more stuff. And I can keep asking, add this dashboard. I can download the report. I can save it as a dashboard, or I can do a ton of fun stuff with that. And by the way, if I would like to add something, it's very, very simple. OpenAI. When I talk about GenAI agents, I'm going to add a new organization. And I say, I don't want fully automated. I'll say partially automated. And then I will just go ahead and release it. Yes. So if I just do that, it actually goes ahead and looks at the public record. So each and every GenAI agent kicks in to gather that data together, to put that into the FAIR analysis. And within a few minutes, whenever you add a third party with 0 hands, you will be able to see things and make things happen. So anyways, while this happens, I'm going to go back and actually invite somebody who's seen the industry very, very closely, not just as a practitioner, but more importantly, as an analyst who talks to a lot of practitioners all the time. So, Ala, I'm going to have you on stage, please, where we get you to talk about TPRM and the state of TPRM, and how are you looking at the evolving industry here. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Ala. Thank you for joining me on stage. So, Ala, firstly, you've seen this market evolve over the years, and we said FAIR is trying to put the R back to the TPRM, right? Let's start with risk, right? What have you seen vendors and practitioners look at? Where was the R all these years when you talk about TPRM?
Well, thank you so much, Saket. First, I want to say that I've been looking at the third-party risk market for a little over 20 years. And here's what I'm going to tell you. That when we think about risk, right, we think of something very negative. And if there's one thing that I'd love for you to take away today, it's that risk is a 4-letter word. But risk is not a dirty 4-letter word, because if our companies were not taking risks, we're not growing, we're not innovating, we're not doing anything exciting. Risk is just a name that we give to opportunity when the results are not necessarily guaranteed. And for too long, the word risk has been overlooked. It's been substituted for compliance, right? It's been substituted for assurance. And when we think about the power of risk, even in the context of compliance, compliance is your floor, it's not your ceiling. And that's why we see fully compliant organizations get breached, experience disruption because they're focusing on the wrong things. Now, risk has surfaced to the forefront with things like resilience from COVID, and absolutely now that we're innovating and we have AI and we have all of these fast-moving parts. But risk in itself is a complex term that involves more than just due diligence, right? It's more than just looking at an entity profile and saying, hey, I have all of this external data and maybe I know that they're not, funding arms, right, to some militia group. I can do business with them, so I've done third-party risk management. The reality is you haven't. Because for risk management, you need to understand context and you need to understand the level of control that you have. And unlike enterprise risk, third-party risk, because organizations only have partial control, oftentimes it gets underestimated or overlooked until negative events, until breaches, until operational disruption happens.
Talking about which, we all saw the AWS outage. And when you talk about resiliency there, Ella, what are your thoughts on that how should people look at resiliency around third parties?
Well, this is another interesting example with the AWS outage because the outage was just of one region, right? AWS East. But you started to see this global disruption, organizations that were using other regions or even European, Asian companies being impacted. And that's because of all of the different dependencies that we have in technology. So things like identity verification and API, all of that was actually hosted in AWS East. So when that region went out, all of a sudden you started to see this cascading daisy chain of disruption. And when we think about third-party disruption, we say, we could not have predicted it. It was, a blind spot, but it'll never happen again until it does happen again. And the thing about third-party risk management is that we can use data. We can use quantification to help us build that bigger picture so that we are preparing for not specific events, but for categories of disruption because there will be another disruption.
Talking about disruptions there, Ella, again, we're living in a very volatile world. When you talk about different kinds of disruptions, right? Again, how do you look at third-party risk in this very, very volatile world where geopolitics to systems changing with the advent of AI, there's just so much going on. Your view around how TPRM practitioners are managing risk in this volatile world?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, how people always talk about back in napkin math. I literally have a napkin with math. Here's what I'm going to tell you, right? That only about 25% of organizations don't even have a team dedicated to third-party risk management. That 62% of organizations aren't factoring risk when they're making sourcing and selection decisions. And that happens because risk management is something that comes later on, right? We've sourced, we've contracted, and then risk has to do that evaluation to better understand what's going on. It's like a stepping stone before onboarding. Today, with the level of disruption that we're seeing, but also volatility, because anything that impacts your company will also impact your third party. And that could be anything from speed of innovation, right? New technology without necessarily having the maturity and the controls to be able to bring that forward. It's about geopolitics to see critical infrastructure or nation state actors targeting certain organizations. But what's really interesting is that hackers have, they're doing well. They're using AI to improve what they're doing. And they also know that why bother attacking a large organization that's invested in their defenses when it's so much easier to attack a relatively insignificant, much smaller third party? But by doing so, not only do they get access to the larger organization, they get access to entire, usually industry or sector of knowledge, of data. And we need to be thinking about who are those smaller, lower spend, relatively insignificant third parties that we really need to be protecting if we want to protect our own organization. Because right now, about 40% of organizations are telling us that third-party risk is important. Yay? Except it's just not as important as other risk areas.
That's very, very insightful, Ella. So thank you for this. Any takeaways from people who are trying to manage third-party risk here? Any final thoughts on this?
So 2 final thoughts. One is, in the context of risk management, risk is not a standalone. Saket, you talked about what is that end goal? What is it that we're trying to achieve? Well, what we're trying to achieve is resilience. We're trying to run our businesses. We're trying to innovate and do things without having that strategy deterred left and right. So rather than thinking about how do we comply, with certain controls, think about what are those best practices that we should be ensuring for our third parties for our own survival. But the other thing I want you to understand is that volatility is not going anywhere. And today, volatility is coming from multiple angles and all at the same time. Regulatory changes, policy changes, geopolitical changes, economic changes. Your ability to keep all of those risk management balls in the air is going to be critical. And you need to really think about prioritizing third-party risk if you want that innovation, that source of power, right? Because without third parties, you don't have an AI strategy, or at the very least, you can't execute on it because nobody's building their own AI. Some of you, probably like me, remember a day when buy versus build was an actual decision. That's not the case anymore. Everyone is buying, which means as you're developing AI and putting forth that AI strategy, your third-party ecosystem is going to increase. And that's why third-party risk and quantification is absolutely critical today.
Thank you, Ella. Super insightful. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Cheers. So guys, imagine all the volatility, all the stuff that's going on with third party. If that can be taken together in an automated way and then influence the threat event frequency, the susceptibility, the actual loss event frequency, et cetera, et cetera. And that again becomes the core part of how do you use FAIR in an automated way for something like third party risk. To summarize, the 3 key learnings that we spoke about. CRQ is its biggest weakness is in its own name. It doesn't sell, but the value of CRQ is golden. And that's the reason why we like, more than CRQ, we like calling it cyber decision intelligence. The second piece is that the biggest barrier for the CISO community has been the mindset of the old way of adopting FAIR, where everything needs to be manually entered. But again, welcome to the new world of AI with automation. Platforms like SAFE and many others are going ahead and actually automating a lot of that manual effort that comes in. And the last piece is FAIR is not just applicable for traditional cyber risk analysis. You can apply the beauty of the FAIR model is that its agility of being applied at different kinds of risk modeling which is out there. To part ways and just to give you final thoughts, FAIR and CRQ is the central nervous system of autonomous cyber risk-based decision-making for CISOs. And I'm also going to the extent of saying it will become that for agents as they take decisions as they move forward. And this group of people sitting here, the FAIR community, is defining the global standard of how cyber risk will be measured and managed in the age of AI. And not every day do you get to be in a profession at a time in your profession where you can have your fingerprints of what the future of the world will be going ahead and doing. And you are architecting that. So very, very happy and proud to see all the incredible work being done by the 18,000 FAIR Institute members and this community and the extended community. So thank you for that. I will wrap up with a 1-minute video of a lot of CISOs, which go ahead and you can switch to the video, sir.
You have a coin flip chance of losing $20 million or more. Does that hurt?
Cyber risk quantification requires a different mindset.
It's a different arena.
And you can't make decisions on red, amber, green. They don't speak in colors or high, medium, low.
Going to the board and having discussion with actual numbers and actual values and quantification would really help that discussion.
The CFO and the CEO and the CTO, they speak in dollars.
What has to change is how we view risk and how we articulate it, because that is the natural language of business.
And it's in a language that they all understand, financial terms.
I think FAIR has been the trendsetter.
So if we can quantify that in a good model, then that helps us decide, all right, here's the amount of risk that we can absorb, and here's the amount of risk that we shouldn't absorb.
Allows the business to make an informed risk-based decision.
You can make decisions, even if they're only order of magnitude decisions, on million versus 10 million versus 100 million.
What I love about the promise of what the solution is in totality is it's really helping you design to give time and resource back.
If it's material, then I know I need to be working on a plan for what we do, when it goes down.
So that was over 25, CISO Confidential podcasts that I went ahead and spoke to different CISOs who will be now a part of this panel moving forward. This is what I wanted to end with. Thank you so much for having me and having Safe here. And it's been a phenomenal part of being a part of a community that's truly shaping the future of cyber risk management. Thank you, everybody.